Hey everyone, welcome to another video. This one is all about post-processing, and let's face it, post-processing is a very important part of digital photography, but it's one of those areas that you can get it wrong, and when you get it wrong, you've completely undone all your hard work out in the field. Another thing that can happen is you might get home with raw files which you think are garbage, but if you are confident and skilled in your processing, you might actually have something there worth keeping. So in this video, I want to share with you common mistakes I see done in post-processing, whether it's Lightroom or ACR in Photoshop. You'll see with the workflow, it's pretty much the same thing. I want to share what to avoid and what to do instead. And at the end, we'll run through and do the whole edit from start to finish without showing the mistakes and how to overcome them. This is obviously all subjective. This is just things that I've learned from in the past, as well as with my students, helping them on workshops. So I hope it helps you too. All right, let's get stuck into it. I've opened up a raw file. We have a seascape sunset scene here, backlit scene, so we've got a big dynamic range to work with. Now, mistake number one, and a lot of you are going to be unhappy about this, but I really advise against pushing the auto button. We're going to push that now. As we can see, it's not doing too much anyway. But generally, the way I view the auto button, it's a little bit like going into the kitchen, grabbing a handful of miscellaneous ingredients, putting it in the blender, and then seeing how it tastes. And a lot of the time, it's probably not going to be a good result, or maybe it gets not a bad result, but there's portions that you don't like, and now you're having to deconstruct and remove some of the ingredients. It's far easier to just approach the file manually, step by step, get confidence and learn the skills you need in order to get the results that you're after, instead of relying on the automated methods. So what will we do in this one? We're avoiding the auto button. The first thing I'll generally do is apply a landscape profile that does a very subtle adjustment to our colors and our shadow recovery. Nothing major, it's worth applying and having a look. A little simple process I want to teach you is LCL, light, color, local adjustments, and that's what we're going to do now. So when it comes to light, we open up the light tab, and this is where basically anything to do with the exposure, the dynamic range in general. A lot of the time I might have to lift the exposure, and I'll often do exposure because it's going to lift every tone evenly. And then I'll do local recovery on certain things. Now, when you do a highlight recovery, go easy, because you might be looking up in the sky thinking about the recovery that's going on up there, but you're forgetting that you're removing highlights from every aspect of the image, because these are all global adjustments. That's why we're going to do more local adjustments. So for now, do a very small highlight recovery. With the shadows, I might be looking at the stacks in the middle, happy with how they're looking, forgetting that I've now lifted all the shadows down in the foreground, and I've lost that sense of depth. So when it comes to highlight and shadow recovery, just go easy on that. We do more locally later on. For this one, that's about all I'm going to do as far as that light tab is concerned. The second one, color. We jump in there, and this is where often I'll adjust slightly the overall temperature and tint. Every single file is different. Depends on your camera, the white balance and the light that you're shooting on the day. The vibrance and saturation, just go easy, particularly on these, more so the saturation, which is our highlights and shadows. The vibrance, you'll find you'll probably be able to get a little bit more in there. You want to make the most of the color you captured, so don't be afraid of using these, but just go easy. So often my vibrance will be anywhere from 0 to 30, saturation 0 to 10, just depends on the file. I'm going to leave those right there. Now the fun part, the local adjustments. But before we get into that, mistake number two that I see, do not make sky selection. So if you click the masking tool, you can select the sky. When we do this, you'll see here, it's going to basically trace around the subject matter in the background. Partially, it's even kind of covered some of that rock. So number one, it's not going to do a very accurate trace. The main problem though, if you're working on a sky, the way the real world works, the atmosphere, anything closer to the horizon is basically further away, and when something is further away, it will be lighter in value. Now, if we do a sky selection and do a global adjustment here on the sky, what's happening to our horizon area of the sky? You've darkened that down way too much, and you've completely lost that natural sense of depth. I just think doing a sky selection, it's just not accurate enough, and it's not adhering to the natural atmospheric perspective we get in nature. So what do I recommend for local adjustments? The brush. Shortcut is K. So let's select the brush, And I recommend putting the feather, the flow, and the density at 100. This will make a very soft brush, and when you click, it will do the full adjustment. So if you want to darken the sky, which we will in this photo to lead the eye down the frame, we're only going to do the top part. The top part is closest to the viewer because those clouds are pretty much above the photographer, leaving that horizon area lighter. So I zoom out like I have, and I might bring down exposure and highlights using the edge of the brush, very big brush. I just gently bring that in. See how I'm avoiding the horizon area? I'm even avoiding the C-stacks. Because the feather is high, it's very soft on the edge. Where the brush there has bled down and touched the C-stacks in the horizon, it was the edge of the brush, so it was getting a very small percentage of my adjustment, and that's how we get a realistic result without making impact on those subject matters which we may not necessarily wanted to hit. It doesn't look right if you zoom in and trace around objects, so another mistake here is zooming right in with that brush and you're darkening things down and you're trying not to hit this subject matter. This is where you just create halos because you're basically leaving a small gap, and that gap is brighter and you see this glowing effect. Nasty, nasty stuff. Use a big brush and just high feather and bring it down like I did. Often in the foreground, I'd do the opposite. I'd go high brush, high contrast now, because this is closer to the viewer, so it can have a higher contrast or darker exposure. Then for the background, I just push K to reset the brush every time. Lighter. Shadows can come up, the blacks, even a small amount of exposure. Relatively smaller brush, but still big. And run that through the background. Those elements can be lighter, they're further away, we need to see the detail in them. Then our edging should be darker. The atmospheric perspective, this is how we make a more three-dimensional result in the image. Local adjustments all being done with the brush. Now, where does it end? Well, the sky's the limit. Another thing I often suggest is using the brush, running in and lifting up highlights and whites. And this can just make some of those lighter tones stand out. Anywhere that has a small amount of light on it, but it leaves the dark tones. So we now get a nice tonal separation through the frame. Now that I've done that, I'm going to actually go back to the color tab, increase the vibrance and then the saturation a very small amount, like so. I might even do one more brush and this time bring up the exposure and rehaze a little here. And this is just going to replicate some of that nice light and just enhance it basically that we had from the sunset out there on the horizon, like so. Now the last tip, what do? Do we just save this now and throw it out there on the net? No, let's let it marinate, let it sit. Just like if you're cooking, you don't want to serve up the meal straight away. Soak up the flavors, do some sample taste as you're running along. I guarantee if you come back with fresh eyes on your processing, on your edits, fresh eyes will allow you to see things differently and you'll most likely make a mistake at least once. And I like to let them sit for a while, do a few looks, passes over on the image. You're going to get a far better result. So slow down, let it marinate, save it as a draft. So if we reset everything, we'll just do before, I push the letter P, and then after, you can see the effect. And if I wasn't talking, I'll just reset absolutely everything here. It would just be a landscape profile, brighter, some highlight and shadow recovery, but not too much. Some vibrance, small amount of saturation. Grab the brush now and start to make my local adjustments. Darkening the edges up the top, a bit more contrast in the foreground. Why am I doing contrast in the foreground and not exposure? Contrast will make the darks darker, but the brights brighter. So the white water there won't get lost. If we do exposure, it just gets all too dark. So more contrast in the front, the opposite in our background, less tonal range, shadows and blacks. These can come up. The atmospheric perspective, anything on the horizon is further away. It should be lighter in value, just like that. And one of the last little bonus tips I'll say is color grading. We have a beautiful cool and warm contrast here. Warm highlights, very typical in our golden hours, often have cooler shadows. If you want to accentuate that, especially in the grading, warm up the highlights further, pick a warm hue and then click and drag to apply it. And then if you wanted to really lean into the natural contrast that we get, cool down the mids and the shadows, or maybe just sometimes the shadows. Every image is different and you'll get that nice contrast going on. this is 80% done. The last 20% or so, I just need to come back and look at it with fresh eyes. So make sure you do that for yourself. There's a person out there I'd probably clone out, so on and so forth. And this is just for educational purposes, this image anyway. I'm not sure I'd keep this because that big open space on the left is driving me crazy. But it worked well for the demonstration anyway. Working in this type of dynamic light with color is quite common for us as landscape photographers. Go easy on the auto button, just avoid it. Otherwise you're just going to be deconstructing anyway. Just slow down, light, color, local adjustments. Avoid the sky selections, not a good idea because we're going to remove that natural three-dimensional look along the horizon there. So just do it with the brush and take it easy. When you're using the brush as well, don't zoom right in and make these very small micro adjustments. You know, if you want to lift that light on the rock, bring up the whites and see how I'm just bringing the light up. That's all good, but you're going to take forever being in there zoomed in that tight. Just get a big brush like I was, Bob Ross style, and just hit that whole area. It's going to look more realistic instead of having these small individual zones that have just had random pops of light on them. If the light's hitting the rock there, it's going to hit the water. Just do it all. If you're doing the whites, it's quite subtle compared to something like exposure. The white will only lift the light and we get that beautiful tonal separation. Anyway, hopefully these little tips have helped you. That's my goal anyway, to help you with your photography. It's a beautiful art. It's changed my life. Hopefully it's changing yours as well. If you have any questions, just leave them below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in a video soon. Cheers.